within all of us, there's like many different parts. It's like a jigsaw puzzle.
Shaped
in
by
a way.
different experiences.
Right. Let's say your grateful part, inner critic part, the brave part, and the anxious part, even that part where you dissociate and prevent yourself from feeling anything, that's also a part in itself. What we have to do is to add in this degree of separation in order for us to treat it with compassion. One of the key points in healing is realizing that all of these parts and all of these emotions are useful. Yes, there may be some which are dominating, but there's a reason why you have. For example, anger. Anger is telling you the things that you cannot accept, and it goes against your sense of boundary or your sense of justice. And so we shouldn't just throw it away.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Untangled Minds podcast, helping you navigate to your truest self one conversation at a time. I'm Noor, trauma recovery therapist and relationship coach.
And I'm Ron, a therapist, advocate, and writer. And for today's episode, we wanted to talk more about this idea of childhood emotional neglect, because in our previous episode, we talked about the symptoms of it, the forms of it, but we didn't really touch on how to actually heal this invisible wound. And so just to recap a bit on what childhood emotional neglect is, it's when your physical needs were attended to you, your food, water, and shelter, but then your emotional needs and the emotional guidance was not.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can't wait to deep dive into, tools, techniques, and tips for you to take away so that you can start implementing them and attending to that emotional wound on the inside. Right? So I would say, the first thing when it comes to attending any wound, any emotional wound, it begins with that awareness. That awareness in recognizing that you actually went through childhood emotional neglect. And this can feel particularly hard, I feel, for a lot of individuals, especially if you grew up in an environment where, it was more conservative, more traditional, where it taught you that, you need to think very highly of your parents. If you think anything other than that, you're a bad kid.
You're ungrateful.
Ungrateful little child.
Yeah, and oftentimes these narratives come from our parents themselves, who say like, I'm the one giving you food, water, shelter. I'm the one who brought you into this world.
Yeah.
So, why are you complaining?
Yeah. How dare you complain?
Also, when other kids are having it worse in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
And so I think my message for people who are facing that dilemma, right, is that these two narratives of like, number one, yes, I'm grateful for my parents because they brought me up and they gave me all of these things that kept me alive. I should be grateful for that. And yes, that's a totally like reasonable thing to do. It's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the other narrative that, as you said, the one that gives us, I guess, a lot of shame, this idea that even though my parents did well in give me the basic necessities, I still have this feeling of, is something missing or something empty? And that I would have preferred a family or parents that were a bit more emotionally attuned to what I was feeling when I was a child. I would say that these two narratives are not necessarily conflicting. And in fact, that they are two sides of the same coin. Two narratives that are both valid and have a place in who we are as human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that it is okay to be, to be grateful, to be appreciative of what, your parents have, given you growing up, while still hold space for that part of you that hurts. Growing up in an environment where you did not feel emotionally safe with your parents. You did not get, that closeness, that intimacy that you're seeking from your parents.
Right. And to me, there is no shame in realizing that your parents were not perfect. There is no shame in realizing that your childhood could have something more.
Yeah.
And that it is often these parts that bring a lot of shame to us. These are the parts that we need to accept the most. And it starts with realizing that, number one, it's not your fault. Any child would have chosen to be in a loving family.
Yeah.
And that if you were not placed into that environment where you did get the love and care that you should have received, that you never chose this, and that it's not your fault to feel this way.
And with that awareness, and seeing these parts inside that's in pain comes the ability for you to be able to compassionately inquire a little deeper about these parts that exist inside of you, right?
Yeah. What does inquiry mean?
So it's essentially you shifting from a place of a lot of judgment, a lot of shaming of these parts, to a place of genuine curiosity in inviting these parts into a conversation to befriend these parts, essentially to get to know these parts a bit better, on what is the pain story that they're carrying, what are they really struggling with, and what sort of help do they need from these parts, right? In order to release this burden that they're carrying for the longest time.
Right. It's interesting. I think we'll touch more on parts later, but I want to pick up on when you said, this is in comparison to the way we usually treat ourselves, which is with judgment
Criticism.
and shame.
Yeah.
And we always say, we are our own worst critics. And oftentimes, when we criticize ourselves, we are doing what our parents did to us when we were younger.
Yeah.
Right? And to move from that self-judgment into self-compassion, and you also said curiosity.
Yeah.
Right? So how do we actually do that? What do we actually say to ourselves to begin that process?
So, before even going into knowing what to say to these parts, I would actually encourage the listeners out there to practice the power of the pause. Right? Because a lot of times when these emotional parts come to you, they can feel particularly overwhelming, very highly charged, as though they're just screaming into your ears to pull your attention towards their agenda.
Yeah.
And it can feel very daunting.
Yeah. For the listeners who are not, this could be the first time hearing about parts and parts work. Could you just give a brief overarching idea of what parts are?
Yeah. So each and every one of us, we would notice that at any point in time, there can be these different voices that we hear on the inside. There might be a voice that goes, your parents did so much for you, and you're deeply grateful for what they did to you. But at the same time, you are also hearing another voice that goes, but they were not particularly emotionally sensitive or attuned to, my struggles, my pain. In fact, when I was crying or, when I was, showing these tantrums, they just kind of dismissed it and told me to just hush or sent me to the naughty corner. Right? So a lot of times when we go through these instances where parents weren't there to safely attune to what's going on inside, we can hear a lot of these personalities on the inside. And how I see every human being is that we are consisting of a lot of these different parts that make us us, which does not make us crazy, it just makes us only human based on all of these experiences that we've been through that naturally brings about these different parts and personalities on the inside.
So what I'm hearing is that within all of us, there's many different parts.
Yeah.
We're made up of them. It's like a jigsaw puzzle.
Shaped by different experiences.
Right. And so we have, let's say, your grateful part, but then you also have this inner critic part, this part that wants more justice, or the brave part and the anxious part, and all of these different parts. And I think something crucial to add on to there too, right, is that the power of these parts is not just in the things that they tell us, but also in the way that our body reacts, and also sometimes even in the way that we act in relationships. I think in the previous episode we talked about numbing, and that's also considered a part within itself.
Yep.
That the emptiness, that even that part where you dissociate and you prevent yourself from feeling anything, that's also a part in itself. Because we are filled with all of these different parts, what we have to do is to add in this degree of separation in order for us to treat it with compassion.
Yeah, exactly. Because what you need to understand about these parts is that they are often younger parts that often hold a lot of the pain on the inside. And when they come to you, they might not exactly come to you in the most respectful, stress-free sort of way.
Shouting at you.
Yeah, oftentimes it feels as though they are just shouting at you, screaming into your ears. And that's why I think a lot of people, because of how these parts come to you, they often go into a shutdown or they avoid, dealing with these emotions altogether because it's just a lot to deal with, right? So the power of the pause technique, it kind of challenges you to be able to go into the space where you're able to create that degree of separation between you and these parts that are trying to send you a message. So with this space in place between you and these parts, it puts you in a better position to be able to observe and to give them that safe space to share what they need to share.
Right. So you don't immediately respond to them. You pause. It's not like a responsive thing, shouting back at your parts. You're pausing and you're taking a break.
Yeah.
And you're saying, okay, what are you really trying to say to me?
Pause, notice what it is that is coming up right now.
Right. And I think that's a good segue into this skill of what we like to call emotional literacy, right? Because in the previous episode, we talked about one of the main symptoms of CEN being an inability to name what you're currently feeling. So we call that emotional illiteracy. So emotional literacy is realizing that, hey, all these parts coming to me, maybe they are the grateful part, maybe they are the anxious part, they are the angry part, or even the exasperated part.
Yep.
And this is really helpful for many of us who, personally speaking, who cannot pinpoint what they're currently feeling. For a lot of our clients, especially who come into the therapy room, and then we ask them, oh, what are you feeling? And they're like, oh, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
So common. What would you say to these clients or these people who are interested in healing to help them begin this process of improving their emotional literacy?
One of the things I have in my therapy room is this thing called the feelings wheel.
Of course.
Yeah, so Ron, you can bring it up.
To grab it?
Yeah.
Here it is.
So this is like a feelings wheel chart.
Yeah.
Right? As you can see, there's a lot here that's going on. And oftentimes we grow up just knowing just a number of emotions. Like, we're angry, we're sad, we're disappointed, perhaps just a few of them, right? But we didn't know that there are actually more than just those emotions that exist in this world. And just by looking at this wheel here, it gives you the opportunity to pause, to take your time to really see which one of these emotions here actually connects with what you're going through.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll put it up on screen now.
Yeah.
Boom. Okay.
And the importance of being able to increase your emotional literacy is that the more you're able to accurately identify what it is that you're, feeling, it becomes easier for you to know how to actually decode the message behind these emotional parts and how to navigate through the emotional overwhelm.
Of course. And I think something that's helpful, right, is that we start off with the first kind of like core emotion first, be it happy or angry or fear and all that. And then we slowly go down and down until we pinpoint, hey, I'm feeling this. I'm feeling this. This instead of this. Which one is a more specific term?
Yeah.
And the more you practice this, the more you build up your bank of the vocabulary, of the word choice that you can use to describe how you're feeling right now.
Yeah.
Something that I just noticed is helpful is the fact that the emotions are separated into color, right? And oftentimes, like, we don't know the difference, but having it be separated into something more visual also helps in sessions as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think apart from this emotional wheel, I think it's a really helpful tool for anyone who's interested. Okay. And another thing apart from the emotional literacy, right?
Yeah.
I imagine is also helpful is asking ourselves where we feel it in our body.
Yes.
Right? This whole idea of like somatic experiencing.
Yeah, body awareness.
Right. Where, yes, cognitively we can say that, we're feeling angry now or a specific word. But there's also this confusion in a lot of the clients that we see that, I don't know where I feel it in my body. So what would you say to help someone who's in this confused state of, how do I begin this process of feeling emotions in my body when I've blocked off this instinct for so long?
Yeah. So again, it's really just pausing to notice what is coming up in your body right now as you're talking about, your childhood experience, as you're even connecting with all these presenting issues that you're noticing about yourself today, you know, that emptiness, there's that disconnection, that feeling of just feeling lost and confused in life. Where are you noticing it's coming up in your body?
Yeah.
Right? Even, you know, you not feeling anything is something. Emotional numbness is something that your body is experiencing right now. It's not
a
nothing.
part.
Yeah.
It's a part. I think one of the key messages or core messages that we want to convey is that even though we have this tendency to label, you know, parts or feelings into good and bad or helpful, unhelpful, one of the key points in healing is realizing that all of these parts and all of these emotions are useful.
Yes.
Yeah, they have a role to play, and that's why you're feeling them currently.
Yeah.
Yes, there may be some which are dominating and we need to pull back on them, but there's a reason why you have the numbness part or the angry part or the sad part.
Yeah.
For example, anger, right? Anger is telling you the things that you cannot accept. They're unacceptable, that you shouldn't accept. And it goes against your sense of boundary or your sense of justice. And so we shouldn't just throw it away. And this is applicable to any other part, even the part that numbs ourselves, that disassociates, because that was the way that we survived when our emotions were too overwhelming.
Yeah, exactly. Because emotions, they teach you towards how to redirect your energy and sense of self. Without really listening to the messages behind these emotions, we would probably just continue the same way of how we relate to ourselves and the world. And perhaps these emotions, like, you know, the anger that keeps coming up, the sadness, the depression that keeps coming up, they would just keep coming up in the same way, but perhaps even stronger and with more intensity.
Right, if we ignore them, we just throw them away.
Yeah.
The other important part that we have to talk about when it comes to CEN, right, is in the previous episode, we talked about our nervous system and how these wounds are stored in our nervous system. For a lot of us, the idea of healing our nervous system is very overwhelming, and sometimes it's quite vague as well. So what would you suggest to help someone who knows that they have this CEN wound to even begin this process of healing a wounded nervous system?
Yeah. So what we know about, you know, individuals who've been through, you know, any form of trauma is that it doesn't just impact the mind, it impacts the body, specifically the nervous system. And the nervous system is an important part of the body that helps to govern a lot of these automatic functioning in your body, right? Like, you know, your heart rate, your breath rate, your digestive system, which is why when you're stressed, you know, your gut goes all wet.
Haywire.
Yeah, right? When
IBS.
you're stressed, you know, you notice that you have like panic attacks that come to you just out of nowhere. When you're stressed, you can't sleep well. Right?
Okay.
So when you're stressed, your body, it doesn't lie. It speaks to you in all these ways. And the way on how to regulate your stress, it's not through trying to think your way through it. Yeah. So, you know, a lot of us, we tend to intellectualize, you know, our own pain and our own suffering. And that itself, it's a form of coping mechanism, right? For us to prevent ourselves from actually feeling that pain. So what we want to do, knowing that, you know, trauma impacts the body, specifically the nervous system, we want to make sure that we attend whatever interventions, tools that we're using right now to help ourselves in our healing. It needs to also attend to the body that is frozen and stuck in the past, right? And how the nervous system resets itself and, you know, navigates itself from that place of feeling not safe to a place of safety and stabilization is not adding more overwhelm to it. It's not trying to create all these symptoms that makes it feel super overwhelmed, right? What we want actually, a rule of thumb, is to make sure that whatever we're incorporating right now in order to regulate our nervous system, it is small, consistent, baby steps, you know, in terms of how we approach regulating our nervous system.
Yeah, and that's in comparison to the way that a lot of people usually go about healing, which is that I'm going to change many things at once. I'm going to make a big change, like heroic change. I'm going to change my life like overnight. But then when this happens, right, it feels like you are climbing a mountain. Yeah, or you're climbing many mountains, and you have many mountains to climb unnecessarily. Whereas a small, more grounded, more realistic approach, right, that is more doable and less like you're doing a chore. So what are some ways, these small grounded steps, right? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. CN, it's a relational wound, right? It's caused from relationships that don't feel safe. So what can help heal and attend to that wound is seeking out relationships that feel safe for that part, right?
Okay.
So be it friends that are like, you know, your safe people.
Yeah.
It could be colleagues that you know that you can safely confide in.
Yeah.
Even your therapist. That is, you know, one of like the safe connections that you can build as part of your resourcing in order to help to signal to your nervous system that, hey, you know, right now in the present moment, things are okay. Maybe in the childhood, right? Yeah, it wasn't so okay.
Exactly.
But right now in the present moment, it's okay. It's going to be okay.
Right. And just to dive a bit into the attachment theory, like in the previous episode, we talked a bit about that. So these safe people, right, we call them secure bases. Yeah, and they are secure bases because they are open and they're available, which is the opposite of what we received as a child, and unavailable and unresponsive caretaker. Whereas we need these people to come in to convince our nervous system that, number one, hey, it's going to be okay, like you said. Number two, that everything's going to be fine because you are supported. We have your back. And that allows you to explore the world with curiosity and take on challenges and risks.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And in doing so, again, like going back to the first episode that we had, we talked a lot about the difference between external validation and internal validation. But the idea here is that we use these other sources of connection to convince ourselves that we can be the secure base to our own self, and specifically our own inner child.
Absolutely.
Right. So this difference, we use the spark of external validation to spark internal validation.
And, you know, other ways on how we can actually create, you know, safe connections, on how to learn how to, you know, connect with our own body. Because again, when trauma happens, you are disconnected from your body. Even though you're physically here, but your body does not want to be here. Because it just feels that it's not safe enough to want to be here. So there are practical ways, small baby ways on how you can try even at home to create these small pockets of connections that over time will amount to something that's significant. So things like, for example, you know, the moment you wake up, you know, you have to go to the toilet, right? You want to brush your teeth, take a shower. These are actually opportunities for you to create that connection. How many of us were so on autopilot mode that the moment we wake up, we're like, okay, I'm gonna like, you know, walk myself to the toilet, brush my teeth, take a shower out of that, you know, toilet, and then off to work.
Right.
We don't really notice these moments that we're in the present moment doing these things because it's on autopilot mode. But what if we were to allow ourselves to just, again, pause, notice what it's like to pick up the toothpaste, put it onto our toothbrush, and then notice what it's like to put it into, you know, our mouth and to brush our teeth.
So what you're saying is to do things with intention, rather than autopilot like a robot. Really feel the act of like putting the toothpaste on your toothbrush, or for me, like I like to take like hot showers in the morning. That's good because like just now we talked about trauma freezing our nervous system. Just feeling what it feels like to have the temperature of the water on your skin, or the very simple way is to notice the way that you're breathing. Bring attention to your breathing. Go on mindfulness walks, or as you are changing your clothes, feel the texture of your clothes on your skin. Get out of this autopilot phase and into intention and purpose.
Really slowing things down intentionally. When you're taking a shower, what is it like to feel, you know, from the shower head, right? The droplets of water coming into contact with your body. The temperature of those droplets, the texture of it. So really about intentionally slowing things down.
Got it. Okay, so just to recap and summarize, there are a few ways to manage and heal the wound of childhood emotional neglect. The first way is to have awareness of when we are facing this wound and not to treat it with shame, but to recognize that all of these parts have a purpose. And that allows us to have more compassion for ourselves as we go into this inquiry phase, to replace that judgment with compassion. And then the next one is to regulate our nervous system through safe people and also doing these small grounded steps.
Yep.
Awesome.
Great summary, Ron.
All right, thank you. All right, so I think we've talked a lot about CEN. And just as we're coming to the end of the episode, so just as a parting message, feel free to jump in. But what I want to end this episode on is that when it comes to CEN, or in fact any other type of inner child wound, it is to recognize that your past is there. Yes, it doesn't define you, but it also, like, you don't have to run away from it. It's not something that you should avoid because your past isn't static. There are always different ways to learn from and interpret. Because it doesn't define you, you shouldn't feel shame from it, especially when it comes to inner child wounds, because it's not your fault. Now, any child, just to reiterate this message, any child would choose to be in a loving family who attends to both your physical and emotional needs. But the fact that you didn't get that as a child doesn't mean that you're broken or worthless in any way.
Yeah, and what beautiful said, Ron. And what I'd like to add on to that beautiful message is this: you knowing about CN, giving a voice to your CN wound, is not about you blaming your parents, blaming the past.
Yeah.
But it is really about you allowing yourself to give a voice to these parts that have always wanted to be heard by you, right? And it's about breaking the cycle and coming back home to yourself.
Exactly. And to give your inner child those things that they deserve but never got.
Yeah.
Their love and their care and their attention and patience. Not shame, not judgment, not criticism, just love.
Yeah. This journey in healing, and I want the people out there to know that this is not an easy journey.
Yeah.
It's hard work. It's a painful work, coming through this and navigating through the wounds of sea. And so I want you to know that this work that you're doing for yourself, it's such brave, courageous work, and you should be really proud of yourself.
You're doing great. It takes time, but you're doing great.
So we hope you enjoyed this episode. We can't wait to see you in the next. Stay curious, take care, and see you